largest jet engines in history, it was supposed to be the new king of the skies. It was built to replace the legendary 747 and change aviation forever. But there is a problem, a big one. Instead of carrying passengers around the world, these giants are sitting in a hangar, gathering dust. Why? Because in August 2024, the dream turned into a nightmare. It happened during a routine inspection. Engineers were checking the test planes after the flight in Hawaii. They weren't expecting to find anything serious, but then they saw it, a crack. This wasn't just a scratch on the paint. The crack was found in a critical part called the thrust link, a heavy metal component that helps attach those massive engines to the wing. Immediately, Boeing had to make a tough call. Ground the entire test fleet. No more flying, no more testing. Everything stopped. This isn't just another delay in a project that is already 5 years late. This is a major structural failure. So how did the most advanced plane in the world end up broken on the ground? Let's dive into the disaster. Anatomy of a breakdown. When you hear cracked structure, you probably imagine a wing snapping in half like a dry twig. Thankfully, that is not what happened there. The carbon fiber wings themselves are fine. The problem is hidden under the wing, right where the engine connects to the plane. The broken part is called a thrust link. Think of it in this way. The engine is a monster that generates incredible power to pull the plane forward. It needs a very strong connection to transfer that power to the body of the aircraft. That connection is the thrust link. It acts like a massive titanium joint or a heavy-duty arm. Its only job is to push the plane throughout the air. So, here is the scary question. If this link breaks in the sky, does the engine fall off? The short answer is no. Aviation safety is built on a principle called redundancy. If one part fails, another part is ready to catch the load. The engine has multiple attachment points, so even with a snapped thrust link, the engine would stay on the wing and the pilots could land safely. But don't relax just yet. While the engine won't fall off, this is still a catastrophe for Boeing. Why? Because this is a brand new plane. Heavy metal parts usually crack after 20 years of flying, not during a few test flights. This is what engineers call a structural failure. It means the calculations were wrong. Either the metal material was too weak, or the vibrations from the engine were much stronger than Boeing expected. And you cannot fix bad mass with tape. You have to redesign the solution. The curse of GE9X engines. To understand why parts are cracking, we need to look at the beast causing all the stress. Meet the General Electric GE9X. This is not just an engine, it's a monster. It's officially the largest jet engine in history. To give you an idea of the scale, the front fan is so wide that you could fit the entire body of the Boeing 737 inside it. Yes, you heard that right, a whole other plane fits inside this engine. But is it possible to be too powerful? The problems with the GE9X didn't start in 2024. The curse began back in 2019, before the 777X even took its first flight. During ground testing, engineers noticed something alarming. The compressor blades inside the engines were wearing out incredibly fast. They were overheating and deteriorating. Essentially, the engine was hurting itself just by running. General Electric had to redesign these complex parts, which delayed the first flight for a long time. Now, seeing the structural cracks in 2024, it raises a difficult question. Is this engine simply too strong for the plane? It feels like the 777X is operating on the absolute edge of what is physically possible, and the stress is tearing it apart. Innovation or unnecessary risks. But the engine isn't the only thing pushing the limits of physics. Let's look at the wings. To make the 777X efficient, Boeing gave it a massive wingspan of over 71 meters. These long, slender wings are great for aerodynamics. They create amazing lift and save a lot of fuel. But there is a practical problem. The plane is simply too wide. It physically cannot fit into standard airport gates. So Boeing came up with a radical solution. They added a hinge. It is the first commercial jet in the world with folding wingtips. After the plane lands, the pilot flips a switch, and the ends of the wings, about 3.5 meters of them, fold up vertically. It looks like a transformer robot. This clever trick allows this giant to park in the same spots as smaller aircraft. It is an engineering marvel. But ask any mechanic, the more moving parts you have, the more things can break. This mechanism requires complex latches, locks, and heavy pins to keep the wings straight during flight. If you look at the recent cracks in the engine mounts, you have to wonder about the wings too. By adding this folding system, did Boeing introduce yet another point of failure? It is a brilliant innovation, but in a project already plagued by structural issues, complexity is a dangerous game. The shadow of the predecessor. Now we have to address the elephant in the room, the ghost that haunts Boeing. When people hear about these problems, they immediately ask one question: is this the next 737 MAX? It is a fair question. The tragedies of the 737 MAX destroyed Boeing's reputation. People became afraid to fly. But it is important to understand that these are two very different situations. The 737 MAX disaster was caused by a software. A hidden computer program called MCAS pushed the plane's nose down, and pilots couldn't fight it. It was a digital trap. The 777X problem is different. It is not software, it is hardware. It is metal and physics. A structural failure like a cracked truss link is a classic mechanical issue. In a way, this is better, because you can see it, touch it and fix it, before anyone gets hurt. However, there is a deeper problem that links both planes: trust. The crack in the 777X was found after the plane had already flown for over 100 hours. Critics argue that this points to the same old problem at Boeing: a broken safety culture. Is the company still trying to rush production? Are they cutting corners to save money? When a passenger steps onto a plane, they don't care if the problem is software or hardware. They just want to know that the company built it right. And right now, Boeing is struggling to prove that they still know how to do that. The economics divide. While engineers try to fix the metal, Boeing's accountants are facing a different kind of a disaster. Time is money, and the 777X is burning billions of dollars. The airlines that ordered this plane are running out of patience. Take Emirates, for example. They are the biggest customer for the 777X. Their president, Tim Clark, has been waiting for this jet since 2020. He isn't just annoyed, he is furious. He has openly criticized Boeing, calling the delays unacceptable. When your most loyal customers start shouting at you in the public, you know you are in trouble. But the real danger isn't just angry words, it is the competition. While the 777X sits broken in a hangar, its rival is already flying high above it. The Airbus A350-1000. The Airbus might be slightly smaller, but it has one huge advantage: it works. It is reliable, efficient, and available right now. Airlines hate uncertainty. They need to plan their schedules years in advance. Why would they wait for a maybe from Boeing when they can buy a guarantee from Airbus? If the 777X doesn't fly soon, it risks arriving at the party after everyone has already gone home. By 2027, will anyone still need this plane? Or will the Airbus A350 have already won the war? So the final question remains: when will you actually be able to buy a ticket? The original plan was 2020. That deadline is ancient history. Right now, the most optimistic forecast is 2027. And even that depends on how fast they can redesign the broken parts and convince the regulators. But when it finally arrives at your airport gate, should you be afraid to step inside? Here is the ironic truth. This disaster might actually make the plane safer. The FAA regulators are under immense pressure. They aren't going to sign any papers until they are 100% sure. They are watching Boeing like a hawk. Every crack, every vibration, and every bolt is being analyzed with a microscope. Because of these delays and failures, the 777X is going through the toughest certification process in aviation history. Paradoxically, by the time it carries passengers, it might be the most tested and verified aircraft ever built. It has the potential to be the safest king of the skies, if Boeing can survive long enough to finally get it off the ground. So, I have to ask, would you feel safe flying on the 777X in 2027? Or would you stick to Airbus? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing. This is a new channel, but I put a lot of effort into every video to make it clear, accurate and worth your time. Now check out this video next. I think you will find it fascinating. Thanks for watching and see you in the sky. Look at this. It is elegant, isn't it? A true giant of the skies. This is the Airbus A340. Now look at this. It's being torn apart, scrapped, crushed into metal cubes. Here is the mystery. The A340 is technically one of the safest planes ever built. In over 30 years of flying, not a single passenger has ever died in an accident on this aircraft. Zero. Usually, airlines keep safe planes forever. But with the A340, they did the opposite. They retired them faster than any other modern jet. Why? The answer isn't about bad engines or poor design. It is much sadder than that. The A340 was an engineering masterpiece. It was the perfect plane for an era that ended the exact moment it started flying. Before we dive into this story of bad luck and big ambitions, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps me a lot. Now let's find out where it all went wrong. Born in the age of fear. To understand the tragedy of this plane, we have to look at its wings. Why does it have 4 engines? Today, almost every long-distance plane has only 2. 4 engines mean more fuel, more maintenance and much more money. It seems like a waste. But in the 1980s, where the A340 was designed, this wasn't a mistake. It was a necessity. Back then, aviation has controlled by something called the 60-minute rule. The rule was simple. If a plane has only 2 engines, it was not allowed to fly more than 60 minutes away from the nearest airport. Regulators were terrified. They thought that if one engine failed over the ocean, the second one might fail too, leaving the plane to glide into the water. This was a huge problem for airlines. You cannot fly straight across the Atlantic or the Pacific Ocean if you have to stay close to land. So Airbus made a strategic bet. They designed the A340 with 4 engines. This allowed the plane to fly anywhere, crossing any ocean without restrictions. Airbus didn't just sell the technology, they sold the feeling of safety. Their marketing slogan was legendary: 4 engines, 4 long hours. They were basically telling the world, 2 engines are for short trips. Real, safe, intercontinental travels needs 4. Airbus bet billions of dollars on one specific idea, that the world would always be afraid of flying over the ocean on 2 engines. It was a smart bet in 1980s, but the world was about to change. Betrayal of the rules, ETOPS and the curse of timing. Just as the first A340s were being delivered to customers, the rules of the game changed completely. A new acronym appeared in the aviation world. Officially, it stands for Extended Range Twin Engine Operational Performance Standards. But pilots had a funnier name for it: Engines Turn or Passengers Swim. Jokes aside, ETOPS meant that engine technology had become incredibly reliable. Regulators looked at the data and realized that modern engines almost never failed. So they increased the limit. First 220 minutes, then 280 minutes away from an airport. Suddenly, the oceans were open for twin-engine planes. This was a nightmare for Airbus. Their main advantage, having 4 engines for safety, was no longer unique. And then the true villain of this story arrived: the Boeing 777. The 777 was a monster. It could carry the same number of passengers as the A340. It could fly the same long distances. But it did all of this with only 2 engines. For airline accountants, a plane with 2 engines is much cheaper than a plane with 4. You buy 2 fewer engines, you repair 2 fewer engines. The maintenance cost dropped by nearly 30%. Almost overnight, the A340 became obsolete. It was like buying the best DVD player in the world on the exact day Netflix was invented. Flying hair dryer. If you talk to pilots or aviation fans, they often laugh when you mention the A340, specifically the 300 version. They have a special nickname for its engines, the hair dryers. Why? Because Airbus made a strange decision choice. To save fuel, they didn't put massive powerful engines on the plane. Instead, they used 4 small CFM56 engines. These are excellent engines for a small plane, like the Boeing 737, but on a huge, heavy A340 filled with hundreds of passengers and fuel for 12-hour flight, they looked tiny. The result is that the A340 climbs incredibly slowly. When you watch a video of this plane taking off, it feels like it will never leave the ground. It seems to use every single meter of the runway. This slow climb created one of the most famous jokes in aviation history. The A340 doesn't actually fly by aerodynamics. It is so slow that the Earth's curves are way beneath it. In reality, the plane was doing exactly what it was designed to do. It was optimized for efficiency, not power. But the reputation stuck. To the world, it looked like a weak giant struggling to get into the sky. A stab in the back from his own brother. But the A340 didn't just lose to Boeing. The most painful blow came from inside of its own family. You see, when Airbus designed the A340, they also designed a twin brother, the Airbus A330. These 2 planes are almost identical. They share the same fuselage, the same wings, and the same cockpit. If you sit inside as a passenger, you cannot tell the difference. The only real difference is under the wings. Originally, this made perfect sense. The A330 was designed for medium distances, and the A340 was the long-range expert. They were supposed to work together as a team, but then technology improved. The A330 got better engines and could carry more fuel. Slowly, it started flying farther and farther. Soon, the short-range brother could fly across the Atlantic just as easily as the four-engine giant. Airlines asked a simple question: why should we buy the expensive A340 if the cheaper A330 can do the same job? It became a classic case of corporate cannibalism. The A330 became a global bestseller, while the A340 gathered dust. Airbus had accidentally built the weapon that killed their own flagship. Attempt at revenge. A340-600. Airbus didn't give up without a fight. They decided that if they couldn't beat Boeing on efficiency, they would beat them on size. They made it longer. And then they made it even longer. The result was the A340-600. At the time, it was the longest passenger plane in the world. It was so long and thin that people gave it a nickname: the Flying Pencil. It was a beast of a machine, designed to carry almost 400 passengers. And because the plane was so long, engineers had to be creative to save space. This led to one of the coolest features in modern aviation. On some A340-600s, you won't find the toilets in the main cabin. Instead, you see a staircase leading down into the darkness. If you walk down the stairs, you find a block of toilets located in the cargo hold, underneath the passengers. It looks futuristic, almost like a private jet or a nightclub. Passengers love it. But cool toilets couldn't save the plane. Just as the Flying Pencil entered the market, Boeing released their ultimate weapon, the 777-300ER. It was almost the same size as the A340-600. It had the same range. But once again, it had only two massive engines. The Boeing 777-300ER burned 20% less fuel. For airlines, the choice was obvious. The A340-600 was a beautiful engineering achievement, but economically, it was dead on arrival. Absurd accidents. Lucky in misfortune. I said in the start that the A340 was incredibly safe, but that doesn't mean it hasn't crashed. In fact, the A340 has a strange record. Usually, when a big jet is destroyed, it is a tragedy with many victims. But with the A340, it is a miracle. In 2005, Air France Flight 358 landed in Toronto during a terrible storm. The runway was wet and slippery. The plane didn't stop. It shut off the end of the runway and burst into flames. The aircraft was completely destroyed by the fire. And yet, all 309 people on board survived. They evacuated in less than 90 seconds. It proved that the A340 was built like a tank. It protected its passengers until the very end. But the most famous accident didn't happen in the sky. It happened on the ground. And it is the perfect example of this plane's bad luck. In 2007, at the Airbus factory in Toulouse, engineers were testing a brand new A340-600. It was painted in the beautiful colors of Etihad Airways, ready to be delivered. The crew needed to test the engines, but they made a foolish mistake. They didn't put hooks, safety blocks behind the wheels. Then they turned all four engines to maximum power.
$200 million straight into the wall. I don't know how we're going to explain this one.
The brakes screamed. The plane overpowered them. It lurched forward and smashed straight into a concrete wall. The front of the plane was crushed. The cockpit broke off. A brand new $200 million jet was written off as scrap metal before it had carried a single paying passenger. That is the story of the A340. Tough enough to save everyone in a disaster. but unlucky enough to crash into a wall before leaving the factory. So where are these giants today? If you go to a major airport, you probably won't see one. Most A340s have been sent to the desert to be scrapped. Their metal is recycled into soda cans and window frames. But there are a few survivors. The biggest fan of the A340 is surprisingly Lufthansa. While other airlines rushed to sell them, the German kept flying them. Why? Because Lufthansa owns these planes completely. They don't have to pay expensive monthly rents to banks. For them, the A340-600 is still a useful workhorse, carrying hundreds of passengers out of Munich and Frankfurt every day. There is also a strange sanctuary for these planes in the Middle East – Iran. Because of international sanctions, Iranian airlines cannot buy new jets from Boeing or Airbus. They are desperate for parts and planes. So they secretly buy old A340s from all over the world. If you go to Tehran today, it is like a time capsule, full of these four-engine legions flying for Mahan Air. But perhaps the most famous A340s were once used by the German government. For years, the German chancellor flew on the VIP version of the A340 named Konrad Adenauer. But remember, this is the unlucky plane. The government jet became a national joke. It broke down constantly. It had electrical failures, tire problems. Once Chancellor Angela Merkel was on her way to the G20 summit in Argentina, and the plane's communication system failed completely. She had to land and take a commercial flight like a normal passenger. Eventually, Germany got tired of the embarrassment and retired the planes early. Today, the market value of an A340 is shockingly low. You can buy a functioning A340 for $12 million. That is the price of a small, second-hand business jet. You could technically buy one yourself. But be warned, the plane is cheap. But filling the gas tank just once might cost you more than the plane itself. Conclusion. The story of the Airbus A340 is not a story of failure, it is a story of bad timing. This wasn't a bad plane, in fact it was a magnificent machine. It was comfortable, quiet and incredibly safe. It did everything the engineers asked it to do. But it was defeated by something it couldn't fight – the price of oil and the relentless march of technology. It was a victim of progress. As we watch the last A340s disappear from our airports, we are losing something special. We are losing the era of elegance. There is something powerful about seeing a plane with four engines. It looks strong. It looks like it's owns the sky. But the aviation world doesn't care about beauty. It cares about efficiency. Today the skies are filled with twin-engine jets that all look exactly the same. They are cheaper, they are cleaner, and they are sensible. But they are also a little bit boring. The A340 was the last of its kind. It was the unluckiest plane in the world. But for those of us who love aviation, it will always be one of the most beautiful. Now I want to ask you, do you miss the era of four-engine giants? Or do you prefer the efficiency of modern twin jets? Write your thoughts in the comments. If you learned something new today, hitting that subscribe button is the best way to support me. As a new channel, every subscriber truly counts and motivates me to create better stories. Thanks for watching and see you next time! Look at these two planes. On one side you have the Boeing Dreamliner. It's huge, it's famous, it's a symbol of power. On the other side, you have the Airbus A321XLR. It looks small, like a regular bus with wings. Now, imagine you are an airline CEO. You need to fly from London to New York. Which plane makes you rich? Your intuition says, the big one, more seats means more tickets, right? Well, your intuition is wrong. In modern aviation, the big plane is actually a trap. If you don't fill every single seat, that massive Boeing burns your money fast. But the little Airbus, it's a cash machine. It does the same job, flies the same distance, but costs half of the price to operate. This is the story of how Airbus didn't build a new spaceship. Instead, they took a simple, boring plane and gave it a superpower. With one engineering trick and a calculator, they destroyed Boeing's strategy for the next 10 years. Here's how Airbus outmastered everyone with just one jet. Fasten your seatbelt, check your like and subscription. Let's take off and find out. Strategic trap. What is the middle of the market? To understand why Airbus won, you first need to understand the battlefield. For decades, aviation had two separate worlds. On one side, you had the small single-aisle planes like the Boeing 737 or the standard Airbus A320 that carry about 180 people and are great for short trips like London to Berlin. On the other side, you had the massive wide-body jets like the Boeing 787 or Airbus A350. They carry 300 people and can fly halfway around the world. But between these two, there was a huge gap, a no man's land. This is what we call the middle of the market. Here is the ironic part. Boeing actually owned this market. They had a legendary plane called the Boeing 757. It was powerful and perfect for this middle zone. But in 2004, Boeing made a fatal mistake. They killed the 757. Why? Because Boeing bet everything on the hub and spoke model. They believed that passengers would always fly to big central airports like Dubai or Frankfurt and then switch to a smaller plane. They thought you didn't mind changing planes. But they were wrong. Passengers hate connecting flights. We hate running through terminals. We hate losing our luggage. We want to fly point to point, directly from our home city to our destination. Airbus saw this shift before anyone else, but instead of spending another $15 billion to design a brand new plane to fill this gap, they did something much smarter. They looked at their existing A321, their standard, boring workhorse, and decided to simply modify it. Engineering. How to fit an ocean liner into a minibus. So, what was the secret ingredient? How do you make a short-range plane fly across the ocean? The answer is fuel, but the problem is where to put it. Normally, if you want extra range, you install big removable fuel tanks inside the cargo hold. It works, but it is a bad trade-off. You get more fuel, but you lose space for cargo. You can fly far, but you can't bring a lot of goods. Airbus engineers did something radical. They didn't just put a tank in the plane. They built the tank into the structure of the plane. It is called the Rear Center Tank, or RCT. It's not just a container. It's fully integrated into the fuselage. This masterpiece of packaging holds an extra 12,900 liters of fuel without stealing space from your cargo. This change is massive. It pushed the plane's maximum takeoff weight to 101 tons. For comparison, the original A320 weighed about 70 tons. But this innovation came with a huge risk. Usually fuel tanks are in the wings, far away from passengers. But this new tank, it sits directly underneath the cabin floor, right under your feet. Regulators were worried. What happens if the plane crashes on its belly? Will the tank explode? It was a certification nightmare. There were delays and arguments about fire safety. But in the end, Airbus reinforced the structure and proved it was safe. They took a massive engineering gamble and it paid off. Now let's open the calculator, because this is where the A321XLR stops being just a plane and starts being a money printer. Let's look at the trip cost, the total price to fly the plane from point A to point B. Imagine a standard 7-hour flight London to New York. If you fly a big wide-body jet, like an Airbus A330 or a Boeing 787, you have a problem. That plane weighs over 120 tons when empty. It burns about 5 to 6 tons of fuel every hour. When you add up fuel, crew and airport fees, that single flight costs the airline between $45,000 to $50,000. Now look at the A321XLR. It weighs a half as much, about 60 tons. It sips fuel, only about 2.5 tons per hour. The total cost of the same flight, about $25,000. It is literally half the price to operate. But here is the most important number, the break-even point. This is the number of tickets you must sell just to cover your costs. On the big wide-body jet, you need to find about 170 to 200 passengers just to break even. If you sell fewer tickets, you lose money. On the XLR, you only need about 100 passengers to cover the costs. Everything after that is pure profit. Now let's get specific about the fuel comparison with the old Boeing 757. A Boeing 757 is a classical muscle car. It's powerful, but it is thirsty. It burns about 3,600 kilograms of fuel per hour. The A321XLR is a modern hybrid. It burns roughly 2,400 kilograms per hour. That is a saving of 1,200 kilograms every single hour. If an airline flies this plane for 4,000 hours a year, they save nearly 5,000 tons of fuel per plane. At current prices, that is a saving of $3 to $4 million per plane every single year. If you have a fleet of 50 aircraft, that is $150 million of pure profit just from fuel savings. This is why airlines are rushing to buy it. Changing the map. Are wide-body jets dead? So does this mean the big wide-body jets are dead? Not exactly. On massive trunk routes, like London to Dubai, you still need big planes to carry 400 people at once. But the A321XLR changes the map for everything else. It allows airlines to play a new game called fragmentation. Instead of flying one big Boeing 777 from London to New York at 1 p.m., an airline can now fly 3 A321XLRs at 9 a.m., 1 p.m. and 6 p.m. The cost is roughly the same, but the passengers are happier because they have more choices. And what about new routes? Consider a route like Dublin to Cleveland. In the past, putting a wide-body jet on this route was financial suicide. You would lose $20,000 per flight, because there simply aren't enough passengers. But with the XLR, this route became profitable. Airlines can now connect second-tier cities directly. We will see flights like Hamburg to Boston, Edinburgh to Atlanta, or Sapporo to Seattle. You might ask, is it smart to use a small plane at big hubs like Heathrow, where landing slots cost millions? Usually, the answer is no. You want the biggest plane possible to maximize the value of the slot. But the XLR solves a different problem. It allows big airlines to keep their slots active during winter or off-peak times, without burning cash on empty big jets. It gives them flexibility they never had before. The success of this plane is humiliating for Boeing, but it is also a lesson for Airbus itself. 15 years ago, Airbus bet everything on the A380 Super Jumbo. It was a double-decker engineering marvel. But financially, it was a disaster. Airbus spent over $25 billion to develop it. They only sold about 250 units in total. They never made their money back. Now look at the A321XLR. Because it is a modification of an existing plane, the development cost is tiny compared to the A380. And the sales? Before the first passenger even stepped on a board, airlines had already ordered over 550 units. Indigo, American Airlines, United Airlines, Qantas, Wizz Air, they all want them. With the A380, Airbus built a palace that no one could afford. With the XLR, they built a highly efficient bus that everyone needs. And Boeing, they have no answer. Their competitor, the 737 MAX 10, simply cannot compete. The Airbus can fly 4,700 nautical miles. The Boeing tops out at 3,300. The difference is the difference between arriving safely in Rome or splashing down in the Atlantic Ocean. Why can't Boeing just fix it? They can't. The 737 sits too low to the ground. Its landing gear is too short to fit the bigger engines or wings needed to fly farther. They hit an engineering dead end. To catch up, Boeing needs to design a completely new plane from scratch. That will take 10 years and $15 billion. Airbus didn't just build a plane. They looked at the mass, found a gap in the market, and filled it before the rival even woke up. And that is how Airbus outmastered everyone with just one jet. The passenger experience. But wait, all this talk about fuel and profit is great for the airline. But what about you, the passenger? You might be thinking, 10 hours in a narrow tube? That sounds like a nightmare. Usually, long flights mean big planes with 2 aisles and lot of space to walk around. The A321XLR has only 1 aisle. So is it going to be a claustrophobic? First, let's talk about the price. Will your ticket be cheaper? It depends on where you fly. Scenario A. On popular routes like London to New York, the answer is yes. Because the XLR is cheap to operate, low-cost airlines like JetBlue or Wizz Air can now fly across the ocean. They will force the big legacy airlines to lower their prices. Competition is good for your wallet. Scenario B. On exotic direct routes like Dublin to Cleveland, the answer is no. You won't get a discount. Instead, you are paying for convenience. You pay to avoid a layover. You are buying time, not a cheap seat. But ask yourself, would you tolerate a thinner cabin if it saves you $200 or gets you home 3 hours faster? Most people would say yes, and Airbus knows it. And that is exactly the question I would like to ask you to share in the comments. I would be very interested to hear your opinion. And if you liked this video, consider subscribing. I'm just starting this channel, but I put a lot of effort into every video to make it clear, accurate and worth your time. And now check out one of these videos. I think you will like them. See you there. Imagine the busiest international airport on a planet just shutting down. No flights, no passengers, just empty terminals and grounded jets. This isn't some hypothetical disaster movie scenario anymore. It is literally happening right now. Dubai is being forced to close its flagship airport. And the craziest part of all of this, the replacement is already being built, and it's going to draft anything we've ever seen in aviation history. So let's talk about what's happening literally right now, in March 2026. If you looked at the flight tracking map of the Middle East recently, you know it is a complete mess. Absolute chaos. The airspace over the Gulf is dealing with massive closures and severe restrictions. We've seen Dubai airports issue emergency statements suspending operation at DXB and their secondary hub Al Maktoum International, also known as DWC. Major carriers like Emirates and Fly Dubai had drastically reduced schedules, cancel flights, strand passengers and basically tell people do not come to the airport unless we explicitly tell you to. But why is this happening? Well, you can't ignore the geopolitical elephant in the room. Following the escalation of the US and Israel conflict in late February, the region has been caught in a massive wave of retaliatory drone and ballistic missile strikes from Iran. The real impact on the airport happened around March 11, when intercepted drone debris fell directly in the vicinity of DXB. It caused minor to moderate issues to 4 people, foreign nationals from Ghana, Bangladesh and India. But it didn't destroy a concourse. The airspace closures were a strict precautionary measure. When you have hundreds of projectiles flying through the airspace, you simply cannot fly commercial aircraft. It is an unacceptable risk. You cannot have a commercial jet sucking shrapnel into its engines on final approach. Right now flights are slowly resuming, but the capacity is way down, and the economic impact on global supply chain is staggering. Freight is literally freezing on a tarmac. Another drone incident on March 16 targeted the airport perimeter and actually damaged a fuel storage tank right near DXB, suspending all operations in and out of Dubai until further notice. They are emergency diverting massive jets over to Al Maktoum. International carriers are cancelling flights left and right, and airport officials are literally begging passengers to just stay home. The economic impact on global supply chains from this is staggering. But war isn't the only thing that has brought DXB to its knees recently. Let's rewind a bit to April 2024. The weather event of 2024 literally turned the runway into an ocean. On April 16, 2024, the UAE experienced its heaviest rainfall since they started keeping meteorological records back in 1949. We are talking about a desert nation that normally sees maybe 95 mm of rain in the entire year. In a single 24-hour period, Dubai got hit with over 142 mm. Out in the Khatam al-Shakla area in Al Ain, it was a staggering 254.8 mm. The footage was insane to watch. Wide-body commercial jets taxiing through water so deep it looked like they were boats. DXB is built in a relatively low-lying area, and when that much water falls, there is physically nowhere for it to go. The UAE's drainage infrastructure simply wasn't built for a one-in-a-century storm. DXB had to pause arriving flights completely. Over 1,200 flights were cancelled across 2 days. Because the terminal was essentially turning into a refuge camp for stranded travelers. The roads to the airport were totally grid-looked with abandoned, flooded cars. And of course, right after it happened, the internet exploded with theories about cloud seeding. You know, the process where small planes fly into clouds and release salt flares to encourage condensation and rain. The UAE does this regularly to secure their water supply. But let's fact-check this as well. While there were indeed cloud seeding flights in the days leading up to the storm, meteorologists and climate scientists worldwide came out and clarified that cloud seeding cannot create a storm of that massive magnitude out of thin air. The real cause was a massive low-pressure system combined with a warmer global atmosphere that held an unprecedented amount of moisture. Basically, climate change shifted the jet stream, collected warm, moist air from the Gulf, and dumped it all directly onto Dubai. And the ripple effect of that storm was massive. If an Emirates A380 can't take from Dubai, it means a gate at London Heathrow stays empty, and a connection in Sydney is missed. The entire global aviation network felt that flood. So you have an airport that is highly vulnerable to both regional conflict and extreme climate events. But here is the most fascinating part of all of this. The real reason Dubai isn't permanently forced to close DXB isn't because of drones, and it isn't because of floods. It's because of mass and geography. DXB is entirely landlocked. It's surrounded by the dense city development of Dubai and the Shirah border. There is physically no more room to pour concrete. You cannot build another runway and you cannot build a massive new terminal. By 2031, DXB is projected to hit 114 million passengers a year. That is its absolute maximum physical limit. Furthermore, Paul Griffiths, the CEO of Dubai Airports, stated publicly that by 2032 the physical infrastructure of DXB will reach the end of its operational life. The runways, the terminals, they will need total replacements, and you can't renovate an airport of that size while running 100 million people through it. So what's the plan? They are shutting down completely. By 2032, Dubai is going to transition all operations from DXB to Dubai World Central Al Maktoum International Airport, or DWC. Now DWC already exists. It's opened for cargo back in 2010 and passengers in 2013, and it actually been acting as a critical relief hub during the current 2026 aerospace crisis. But it is about to undergo a transformation that is hard to even comprehend. In April 2024, the Dubai government officially approved a 128 billion dirham budget, that's about 34.8 billion US dollars, for phase 2 of DWC's expansion. When this is done, it will be undisputed largest airport in the world. Let me throw some numbers at you. Right now, DXB has 2 runways. The newer DWC will have 5 parallel runways. It will cover 70 square kilometers. Phase 1, scheduled to be completed by the 2032 deadline, will handle 150 million passengers annually. And the final master plan, a staggering 260 million passengers and 12 million tons of cargo every single year. Let's put 260 million passengers into perspective. Hartsfield-Jackson in Atlanta is currently the busiest airport in the world by passenger volume, handling around 104 million people a year. DWC is planning to be 2.5 times the size of Atlanta. They are building an entire aerotropolis, a city built entirely around an aviation hub, with residential zones, commercial districts, and dedicated logistic corridors. And think about the transition itself. Moving an airport isn't like moving out of an apartment. You have hundreds of aircraft, thousands of pieces of ground support equipment, tug tractors, baggage carts, catering trucks. In 2032, they plan to move all of this. They aren't going to do it piecemeal. Operating 2 massive hubs just a few dozen miles apart splits traffic and completely ruins the hub-and-spoke model that Emirates relies on. So in 2032, they are planning a massive, unified switchover. In a very short window, potentially 24 to 72 hours, Emirates, Fly Dubai and all the infrastructure will just pack up and move south to Dubai South. It reminds me of when Hong Kong moved from Kai Tak to Kok Lap in 1998, but on a scale that is exponentially larger. It is an incredibly bold move, but it makes perfect sense. Moving the primary aviation hub down to Dubai South pulls all that heavy traffic and logistical congestion out of the city center, freeing up massive amounts of prime real estate where DXB currently sits. So when you look at the headline saying Dubai Airport is closed, you really have to look at the bigger picture. In 2024, it was historic, climate-driven floods. Today, in 2026, it's very real, very scary reality of a regional war and airspace security. But ultimately, the final permanent closure of DXB is calculated, multi-billion-dollar evolution. It is the end of an era of one of the most iconic airports in aviation history. But it's the beginning of something completely unprecedented. I'm really curious what you guys think about this. DWC will actually hit the 260 million passenger capacity? Or is the current geopolitical situation going to severely delay this mega project? Have you ever flown through DXB, and what was your experience like? Let me know down in the comments. I'd love to hear a discussion about it. And hey, if you made this far, thank you so much for watching. Please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel and turn the notification bell, so you don't miss our next deep dive into the aviation world. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you in the next one. What if I told you Boeing once designed a monster 50-seat jumbo jet? Not necessarily to revolutionize travel, but to potentially bankrupt Airbus. Welcome to one of the most intense high-stakes game of corporate poker in aerospace history. The year is around 1999. The aerospace industry is watching a collision course. Airbus is aggressively gearing up to launch the A3XX, the massive double-decker giant that we all know today as the A380. In response, Boeing unveils a Leviathan of their own, the 747X. To a lot of industry insiders, the 747X was pitched as the ultimate evolution of the Queen of the Skies. But there's a massive twist to the story. Many analysts at the time believed this paper plane was the ultimate bluff. A $4 billion decoy created solely to fracture the market, steal just enough orders, and got Airbus into spending tens of billions on a super jumbo project that would ultimately bleed them dry. Was the 747X a genuine engineering marvel? Or was it the greatest corporate deception of the 20th century? We are going to get into all of it. The airport infrastructure wars and the monster specs. So pull up a chair, smash that like button and subscribe to the channel right now, and let's discuss exactly what the 747X was. To really understand the 747X, we have to talk about the battlefield of the late 90s. For 3 solid decades, Boeing had held an absolute undisputed monopoly on very large aircraft market. The 747 was their cash cow. It funded almost everything else they did. Airbus, frankly, was tired of picking up the scraps in the high-capacity market. But here is a wild piece that usually gets left out of the history. Before they went to war, Boeing and Airbus actually tried to team up. Back in 1993, the two rivals engaged in a joint study of a very large commercial transport. They looked at the global data together and realized the harsh truth. The market for a 500-plus seat aircraft was actually quite small. They figured there was maybe demand for 400 to 500 of these planes globally. The math was brutal. If both companies built a super jumbo, neither would make a profit. But, as you might expect, when you put two aerospace giants in a room, the partnership collapses. Egos slashed, design philosophies fundamentally disagreed, and they walked away. Airbus decided to bet the farm. They greenlit the A380 project, aiming to kill the 747 once and for all. Boeing now had a very expensive choice to make. They could spend roughly $15 to $25 billion to design a clean sheet super jumbo to fight back, or they could set a trap. Enter the 747X. Instead of a brand new plane, Boeing announced a radical, massive modification of their existing 747-400. And the genius of this move wasn't in the aerodynamics, it was in the accounting. Because the 747X was a derivative aircraft, meaning it borrowed heavily from an existing airframe and planned to use off-the-shelf engines from the 777 program. Boeing estimated it would only cost them about $4 billion to develop. Compare that to the $25 billion Airbus was burning on the A380. Boeing was risking pennies on a dollar. This is what industry analysts call the spoiler strategy. Boeing knew the A380 needed to capture almost 100% of the super jumbo market just to break even. If Boeing could convince just a handful of major heavy-hitting carriers, like British Airways, Qantas or Singapore Airlines, to order the much cheaper 747X instead, the A380's business case would completely collapse. Boeing didn't necessarily need the 747X to be the best-selling plane in history. They just needed to fracture the market enough to make Airbus fail. But the battle wasn't just happening in the sky, it was happening on the tarmac. This brings us to the airport infrastructure war. And this is where the genius of the 747X really shows. The Airbus A380 is a remarkably wide airplane. Its wingspan is 79.8 meters. It was designed to push the absolute physical limits of what is known as the 80 by 80 meter box, or ICAO Code F standard. The problem? Back in the late 90s and early 2000s, almost no airports were built for Code F. The global standard for heavy international gates was the 65 by 65 meter box, or Code E, which perfectly fit the 747-400. If airlines bought the A380, it meant airports around the world would have to spend billions digging up taxiways, reinforcing concrete to handle the A380's massive 1.2 million pound weight, and building entirely new multi-million-dollar double-decker boarding bridges. Boeing pitched the 747X as the ultimate plug-and-play alternative. Yes, it was going to be huge, but its wingspan was kept in 69.8 meters. Boeing argued that with just a few minor operational waivers, it could still safely squeeze into those existing 65-meter Code E gates. More importantly, it kept the traditional single main deck boarding doors. Airlines could use the exact same jet bridges they already had. Boeing's pitch was brilliant. Buy the A380 and force your hub airports to spend billions of dollars on concrete. Or buy the 747X, and we just need them to repaint a few lines on the tarmac. Let's put the corporate chess game aside for a second and look at the metal. It would have been an absolute leviathan. We aren't talking about a simple update. The crown jewel of the pitch was the 747X Stretched. This absolute unit was designed to measure in at a staggering 80.2 meters. That is 263 feet from the nose to tail. To put that into perspective, the longest commercial passenger plane flying today is the 747-8 Intercontinental, and that is only 76.3 meters long. The 747X Stretched would have completely drafted it. It would have held the title of the longest commercial passenger aircraft in history. To lift this extra mass, Boeing planned to borrow those massive, high-bypass power plants from the 777 program, specifically derivatives of the Engine Alliance GP7200 or Rolls-Royce Trent engines. They redesigned the wing, extending it to that 69.8 meter span, and kept it with racked wingtips to slice through the air with modern efficiency. The X Stretched was designed to swallow over 500 passengers in a standard 3-class layout. But here is the most fascinating design quirk of the entire project. Boeing couldn't build a full second deck like the A380 without ruining their $4 billion budget. So they got incredibly creative with the empty space above the main cabin. They pitched airlines on using this overhead crown space for secret compartments. They drew up plans for passenger sleeping berths, where you could climb a ladder into a bed-sized pod in the ceiling. They also proposed moving the galleys, the kitchens and the crew rest areas up into this attic. Airlines could free up prestigious main deck floor space for more revenue-generating seats. You would think a plane with these monster specs, low development costs and plug-and-play airport compatibility would have airlines lining up around the block. But the reality? It was a defeating silence. Boeing took the 747X on a massive global roadshow, pitching it to all the heavy hitters. But the airlines just weren't buying the hype. When executives looked at the 747X, they didn't see the future. They saw a 30-year-old design on a life support. It felt like a rehash. The 747X found itself caught in the worst possible middle ground. If carriers wanted sheer efficiency and lower operating costs, they were already falling head over heels of the Boeing 777, a twin-engine marvel that burned way less fuel and required vastly less maintenance than a four-engine jumbo. And if they wanted unduly rated size and luxury to dominate major hub airports, the Airbus A380 was the shiny, clean-sheet design offering the true double-deck experience. The 747X was not efficient enough to beat the 777, and it wasn't big enough to kill the A380. The final verdict was brutal. Total orders secured for the 747X? Zero! Not a single one. It seemed like a spoiler strategy has backfired, leaving Boeing with nothing but a paper plane. But good data never dies. The 747X program was quietly scrapped from the brochures, but the R&D was pure gold. That aerodynamics research on the ranked wingtips, the structural reinforcement required for a massive fuselage stretched, the complex integration of next-gen engine technology, it wasn't thrown in the trash. It was saved on a hard drive in Seattle. Fast forward just a few years, Boeing realized there was still a niche market for a highly efficient, high-capacity freighter and passenger jet. They took that failed 747X technology, combined it with the bleeding-edge tech they were developing for the 787 Dreamliner, and resurrected it. The result? The 747-8 Intercontinental and Freighter. The 747X didn't really die, it just went into hibernation. It served as the essential, necessary rough draft that bridged the gap between the classic 747-400 and the modern efficiency of the 747-8. It kept Boeing's engineering team incredibly sharp on the large structure aerodynamics, and it proved that the iconic 747 airframe still had room to grow. Looking back at the classified files, the 747X is an incredible paradox. It is the plane that never was. Yet, it is the exact reason the Queen of the Skies survived well in the 21st century. As a commercial product in 2000, it failed. But as a strategic weapon and a technological stepping stone, you could argue it was a masterstroke. But it leaves us with one burning what-if that still keeps aviation historians up at night. And I really want to hear your take on this. Let's discuss in the comments. If Boeing had actually built the 80-meter 747X stretched in 2000 and aggressively undercut Airbus on price, would the A380 have failed even sooner? If the 747X had stolen just 20 or 30 key orders from the A380 early on, would the entire super jumbo era have collapsed years before it finally did? Drop your thoughts below. I read every single comment and I love seeing your theories. If you enjoyed this discussion, please make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel with notifications turned on. It is the absolute best way to support the channel and ensure you don't miss our next investigations. Thanks for hanging out and talking aviation with me today.